In the middle of the grey and stuffy streets of the city, where time seemed to run slower for those who had nothing, lived a young girl of only 17. She carried in her eyes a delicate mixture of sweetness and a strength that few could imagine, as if, even in adversity, her soul found a hidden glow ready to illuminate any darkness. Orphaned from a very early age, her story was marked by losses that left deep scars, not only on her body, but on her heart. Life for her had not been generous. She grew up in temporary homes, where the reception was always temporary, and the doors often closed with an echo of rejection. The world seemed to ignore that girl who, silently, carried a heavy backpack of crushed memories and dreams. Since she was a little girl, she knew what it was like to wake up alone, to deal with the emptiness of absence and to face the contempt of those who, instead of reaching out, turned their faces. Humiliations came in the form of crooked looks, harsh words and slammed doors, a cruel cycle that threatened to shatter her hope by the day. But there was something about her that resisted, a spark that not even the worst storms could extinguish. It was the determination not to let herself be defined by her own history, the will to prove to herself that she could be more than what cruel fate seemed to want. When life seemed about to swallow her dreams, an unexpected spark arose, a chance to work as a maid in a luxurious mansion, located in the most upscale neighborhood of the city. It was a totally different world from the one she knew, a universe where doors were heavy, clothes were expensive, and secrets were deep. There she would have no room for luxuries, living in a small and stuffy room at the back of the property, dividing her time between household chores and the silent care of details that no one saw. But for her, that opportunity represented more than a job. It was a chance to start over, to prove herself worthy, to fight against the invisibility she had carried since she was a child, even in the face of the exhausting routine and the distance between her life and that of the residents of the mansion. The young woman never lost the sparkle in her eye. Behind the simplicity of his uniform and humble position, there was a resilient soul, ready to face any storm. Her heart, though scarred by absence and pain, held dreams that flew high, even when the world insisted on keeping her on the ground. It was this strength, silent but powerful, that made her get up early every day, dress herself with what little she had, and go to the fight, facing an uncertain future with courage. That young orphan, invisible to many, carried within her the potential to transform not only her own life, but also to touch those who crossed her path, a subtle glow which could light a flame where it was least expected. In the midst of the imposing mansion and the corridors full of luxury and secrets, she prepared to live a story that would forever change her trajectory, a story of love, pain, struggle, and revelations that would challenge everything she believed about herself and the world around her. If you want to follow this exciting journey, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any chapter of this incredible story. In the mansion, where luxury was stamped in every detail, between antique furniture and walls covered with paintings that told stories of generations, lived an 18-year-old young man whose name carried the weight of an entire family. Tall, with striking features, always impeccable hair, and a look that mixed arrogance and tiredness, he seemed, in the eyes of those who did not know him, the perfect portrait of comfortable life. But behind the rehearsed smile and haughty posture, there was a deep restlessness, a void that no wealth could fill. Controlled since childhood by family agreements and unbreakable expectations, he felt like another cog in a game he hadn't chosen to play. The formal dinners, the imposed conversations, and the commitment to a bride chosen long before he even imagined his own future were gilded prisons that stifled his freedom. On one of those nights when monotony seemed to overcome any spark of will, he sought refuge in the mansion's library, a little frequented space where silence reigned supreme. There, among bookshelves full of old books, he found an outlet from the turbulent thoughts that accompanied him. It was in this scenario, so different from the superficial brightness of parties and events of high society, that chance decided to intertwine two unlikely destinies. She, the young orphan who knew every corner of the house, and that night took care of cleaning the environment, was surprised to see him there. He, for his part, expected to find no one but the shadows of books and the perfume of time. The meeting was brief, a moment charged with inexplicable tension, where a glance crossed and a silence settled between the two. It was as if, at that moment, a whole world had stopped to observe that contact so simple, but which carried a promise of something greater. There were no words, no grandiose gestures, just the silent exchange of hitherto unknown emotions, a spark that lit a timid but insistent flame. In the days that followed, these fortuitous encounters were repeated, more and more frequently, although kept in the most absolute discretion. Small details began to change. Lingering glances crossed the corridors, shy gestures appeared at unexpected moments, and the presence of the other, previously ignored or invisible, began to make itself felt strongly. She, who had always been invisible, began to notice something different in his way, a curiosity that went beyond social barriers and the walls of the mansion. He, in turn, was attracted not only by her simplicity, but by the authenticity that seemed to be lacking in everything around her. It was a meeting of different worlds, a clash of realities that no one could have predicted. As these small encounters piled up, a question silently arose in the air, almost like a secret shared between them. What exactly was being born there? Was it just a passing illusion, a distraction to escape obligations, or was it the beginning of something that defied all the rules, something forbidden and intense? This doubt hovered, invisible but palpable, like a breeze that stirs the leaves before the storm. The two, trapped in their own stories, began to discover that this connection, unlikely and unexpected, had the power to transform their lives forever. It was impossible to deny the growing tension that filled each encounter, a mixture of curiosity, desire, and fear of the unknown. They didn't know yet what it would mean, nor the risks they were about to take, but something inside them pushed them to continue, to explore that new and forbidden feeling. The mansion, which until then had represented a place of rigidity and control, began to be the stage for a love that arose between silences and looks, a love that no one should know. And so, in the midst of the silent nights and days full of expectations, this young woman and that young man began to write a story that challenged not only his family's norms, but also the destiny that seemed to have been traced for both of them. A story that, even in the shadows of secrecy, shone with an intensity impossible to ignore. As the days passed, that bond that had begun so subtly began to grow with a silent force, almost impossible to contain. What was a fleeting glance and a timid silence turned into stolen moments, discreet gestures and whispered conversations, always hidden from the watchful eyes that surrounded the mansion. Between the marble walls and the carefully trimmed gardens, a forbidden love began to bloom, a flame that burned against all the rules and conventions that life imposed on them. Despite the immense social differences that separated them, she and he found something surprising in each other's company. They were not just two young people destined for opposite roles within that rigid and inflexible world, but rather souls who carried similar pains, shelved dreams, and a loneliness that few could understand. She, accustomed to rejection and absence, hid in her silence the strength of those who had to rebuild themselves many times. He, marked by the pressure of a family that chose his path and a future written in contracts, felt trapped in a world he never chose for himself. The purity of feeling that grew between them had nothing of the ostentation of high society parties, nor of the luxuries that money could buy. Their meetings took place in discreet and unexpected places, in the garden hidden behind the mansion, where the flowers seemed to keep their secrets, in the kitchen while she was carrying out her tasks, and he would appear unannounced, looking for a little normality and spontaneity. Even in the old basement of the house, a forgotten space that for some reason became the perfect refuge for their conversations and shy laughter. Each encounter was a universe apart, a piece of true and pure life, which defied the external world and suffocating expectations. But this growing intimacy did not come without a price. Fear, a constant shadow, hung over every moment shared. He was promised to another, an alliance that was not only social, but a powerful negotiation that secured the future of the family's fortune and prestige. For her, the risk was even more palpable. If they were discovered, her life would change in an instant. She would be expelled from the mansion, thrown back into the cruel world where surviving was a daily battle. That love, although beautiful and genuine, carried the weight of the forbidden, of distrust, of constant threat. And yet, even with fear running through every second, the desire to be together was stronger. Each secret meeting was a small victory against the barriers imposed by life. The adrenaline of seeing yourself on the sly, the care not to leave clues, the fear of the next step, everything was part of that intense and sweeping adventure. They knew they were challenging not only their families, but an entire society that did not accept that such a love could exist between such different worlds. This duality, between the pleasure of finally feeling alive and the anguish of what might happen, made everything even more intense and true. They experienced the beauty of a love that flourished in adversity, a love that, despite its differences and the dangers that surrounded it, seemed capable of transforming not only their lives but the fate of everyone around them. The racing heart, the looks that said everything without needing words, the exchange of furtive touches and the silent promises built a bond that was impossible to break, even in the face of the threats that hung in the air. And as that love grew, stronger, hidden beneath the veil of night and secrecy, a storm began to brew outside, a storm that could end everything or reveal forces no one knew existed. What was once just a timid feeling now gained body and voice, about to change the course of that story forever. The mansion, the scene of so many rules and conventions, was beginning to feel the weight of what could not be controlled. This love, which sprang between the forbidden and the dream, was a promise of transformation, courage, and overcoming. And despite the dangers, they continued to meet, living each moment with the intensity of someone who knows that time may be short, but the strength of feeling is eternal. The tension between desire and fear kept everything on edge, making every moment more precious and every choice harder. Thus, in that universe of contrasts, what seemed impossible began to come to life. And while the outside world tried to stifle that feeling inside them, it grew, secret, pure, and capable of turning everything upside down. What seemed to be just a delicate secret, kept with extreme care and almost a silent devotion, exploded brutally in the routine of the mansion. The garden, once the stage for discreet meetings and shy exchanges of glances and words, became the scene of a discovery that would change everything forever. His mother, a woman with an imposing presence and eyes that lost nothing, saw them there in the refuge they believed to be safe, as if time stopped for an instant and reality collapsed on them. The scene, simple and innocent to outsiders, was interpreted as an unacceptable betrayal and an affront to the order that the family has always maintained with an iron fist. The silence that once existed between the two was broken by a storm of accusations that fell like a hammer on her. The father, upon hearing the news, was furious in a way that seemed to extract all the air from the environment. His stern voice demanded the immediate resignation of the young woman, as if that decision could erase what had happened. There was no room for explanations, for feelings, for humanity. In that instant, she went from being a person to becoming a bothersome problem that needed to be eliminated quickly and cruelly. What followed was a public humiliation so profound that no words could fully express the pain experienced. In front of all the employees in the large room that witnessed every step of that powerful family, she was accused of seducing her son, of exceeding limits that, for them, could never be violated. The young orphan, who until then had carried with her an admirable strength, was reduced to shame and injustice, being the target of accusing looks and cruel whispers. He tried to stand up to defend her, to speak out against that injustice that broke his chest, but he was silenced in an authoritarian way, prevented even from expressing the love he felt, suffocated by the rigidity of a system that did not accept his will. Without the right to say goodbye, without any support, she was expelled from the mansion. That night, the sky cried with her. The rain fell heavy and cold, soaking her only suitcase, her dreams, and her dignity. The road ahead of him was dark and uncertain, and the fear of having nowhere to go mingled with the deep pain that consumed his heart. What had once been pure, silent love now became an open wound, an almost unbearable shame that seemed to want to destroy all that was left of hope in her eyes. She walked alone, under the weight of a world that denied her justice and compassion. At that moment, the cruelty of reality seemed to crush her. The forgotten girl, who one day carried the sparkle of overcoming in her eyes, found herself at a rock bottom that seemed infinite. Injustice was not just a personal matter. It was a humiliation that reflected the differences between classes, the weight of prejudice, and the harshness of a destiny traced by those in power. The heart that once beat fast for a love that could transform his life now became a prison made of tears and silence. But even in the face of pain that seemed too immense to bear, an invisible spark still resisted. What seemed to be the end of everything, in fact, began to be the point where something new and unexpected could emerge. Life, with its mysterious force, holds surprises for those who do not allow themselves to be broken by adversity. And so, while the rain washed away his sadness and the night enveloped his tired body, a new chapter began to draw on the horizon. It was the moment when the weight of humiliation, injustice, and loss could be transformed into the strength for a new struggle. The pain was no longer just a burden, but the impetus for something greater, a turning point that was about to happen. The story of that young woman, marked by abandonment and forbidden love, still had much to reveal. And despite the darkness of that night, something inside her was beginning to rekindle, a hope that not even the most violent storm could extinguish. The forced farewell settled like a thick shadow over their lives, hovering with an almost unbearable weight that neither of them could dispel. She, expelled from the mansion, immersed in a world that seemed unknown and implacable, sought precarious survival on the streets. Each step was a fight against the fear, hunger, and cold that accompanied her through the endless nights. The underemployment she got was far from what she had dreamed of for herself, but they were her only alternative. Working as a waitress, cleaning other people's houses, carrying boxes in markets, anything that would give her a few coins to secure the next day. The glow that once illuminated her gaze was now opaque, hidden under the thick layer of pain and abandonment. Yet within her, a spark of resistance refused to go out, even when loneliness seemed overwhelming. At the same time, on the other side of that universe of wealth and rigid rules, he faced his own internal battle. Isolated by his family who disapproved of his every move, he felt trapped in a cage of obligations and suffocating expectations. The walls of the mansion, which had previously seemed luxurious and protective, were transformed into invisible walls that held his heart and his will. Arguments with parents became frequent and intense, filled with anger and frustration that erupted in muffled screams through the hallways. He tried to find her. He knew she was alone. He needed to have her close. But the world that separated them seemed like an insurmountable barrier. The search became more desperate every day, but fate remained cruel and indifferent, denying them any possibility of reunion. Both lived in a silent torment, carrying the open wound of a love that could not be healed by distance or time. The memories invaded their minds constantly, the soft touch of their hands, the warmth of the eyes they cherished even in the most difficult moments, the dreams they shared in the nights of secrets and hope. Each thought in one made the absence of the other even more painful. The feeling that united them, although forbidden, continued to pulsate like a stubborn, insistent flame which none of their hearts could extinguish. In the silence of their separate routines, love forbade them to truly move on. As much as reality tried to crush their dreams, the truth was that the connection between them withstood all storms. What pushed them physically apart was never able to erase what they felt, nor to undo the invisible bond that continued to unite their destinies. They were two souls scarred by an encounter that, however brief, changed their lives forever, a deep mark that remained present, fueling the pain but also a hope that refused to die. In this scenario of longing, painful absences and shattered dreams, something invisible began to move, about to challenge the cruel logic of separation. It was as if the universe kept, even in the shadows, a possibility so that what seemed lost could somehow find a way. The love that was born between them was not finished. He was just entering a new chapter, where the struggle against circumstances gained an unexpected prominence. The pain that consumed them, the longing that tightened their chests, and the silence that enveloped them had a greater meaning. It was the sign that something was yet to come, something that would change the course of their lives forever. The journey that seemed lonely carried with it a secret force, capable of overcoming abandonment and suffering. As the young woman faced the cold of the homeless nights, and the young man fought against the imprisonment imposed by his family, fate began to trace its steps, uniting them again in a game where courage and hope would be the only weapons capable of breaking the barriers erected between them. What seemed impossible gained contours of possibility, and the promise of a reunion became a beacon in the darkness of his days. There, in the midst of pain and struggle, the seed of a strength that no one could control was born, a feeling greater than distance and fear. The story of that young woman and that young man, marked by a forbidden passion and a painful separation, was still far from finding its outcome. The road before them was full of obstacles, but also of a hope that stubbornly resisted, silent, pulsating through the shadows and preparing the ground for what was about to happen. The pain of abandonment would not extinguish the flame that burns in their hearts, and the love that united them still held secrets that time and distance could not destroy. In the midst of the darkness that enveloped her life, when the pain seemed too immense to bear, an unexpected moment appeared, like a spark that ignites in the silence of the night. She, still marked by humiliation, hunger and cold, found strength, where many would believe there would be nothing else. It was during one of the rare visits to his former home, now just a forgotten refuge, that an object hidden among dusty belongings caught his eye. An old box made of time-worn wood, kept among yellowed papers and old photographs, a carefully folded letter, with the delicate and familiar handwriting of his mother, who had left years ago. This letter, written with a tone charged with mystery and sadness, revealed a long-kept secret, a secret she never expected to find. In it, her mother mentioned a name that seemed simple at first glance, but that carried a weight that reverberated for generations. The paternal grandfather of the rich young man who had stolen her heart and who had also condemned her to abandonment. The letter spoke of a profound injustice, of a past stained by acts that no one dared to question. Between the lines, there was a clue that urged her to seek answers, answers that could turn her story upside down and perhaps explain everything they had experienced. It was as if that discovery shed light on the shadow that had fallen over her life, awakening in her a strength she did not yet know she possessed. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and a quiet will for justice, she began a quiet, almost clandestine investigation. Gradually, he searched for documents in public archives, revisited places where former employees of that mansion still worked, and gradually began to put together the pieces of a puzzle that revealed much more than simple family secrets. Every conversation, every yellowed paper, every record searched in notary offices or hidden libraries shaped a story hidden behind the facade of wealth and prestige of that powerful family. What he discovered was disturbing. The fortune that sustained the luxurious world of the young man he loved had deep roots in a cruel and unforgettable robbery, a crime committed decades ago against his own family, a robbery that the official justice system preferred to ignore. This truth, when it finally emerged from the shadows, didn't just bring revelations, it brought with it a transformation in the protagonist. She who had been seen as a victim, humiliated and discarded, now found herself invested with a new power, a strength that came from the knowledge and courage to face a history that many tried to hide. The past, which was once a weight that oppressed, her now became a silent weapon, a chance to change not only the course of her life, but also to challenge a system that relied on lies and injustices to maintain its appearances. The mystery of that letter not only revived his hope, but also created a scenario where the battle for truth began to take shape, paving the way for a twist that could redefine the fate of everyone involved. The revelation of the letter was a turning point, a moment when suffering and pain gave way to a quiet but unwavering determination. She felt for the first time that she was not alone against the world, that there was a reason for what she had faced, and that her struggle could be more than personal. It could be a struggle against a heritage of injustice and silence. Each step of that new journey, each clue discovered, made her heart beat faster, feeding a hope that went beyond the reunion with the young man she loved. It was the desire for justice, for reparation, to show that the truth, no matter how painful, always has the power to liberate. Even in the darkest days, the truth of the letter held her firm, like a beacon that lit her path through the shadows. The mystery of that story, buried in the past, also brought up doubts and questions that disturbed her, making her reflect on everything she had known until then. The forbidden love she had lived, the pain of separation, the humiliation she suffered, everything gained new nuances in the face of that discovery. She saw herself as part of a larger plot, where powerful interests tried to silence voices and erase uncomfortable facts. This realization created a complex mix of fear and courage, for the truth he sought exposed not only family secrets, but also the risk of facing forces capable of anything to keep silent. This tension made each step of the investigation charged with adrenaline and uncertainty, and at the same time, a fierce desire to go to the end. As she delved deeper into this search, her mind kept thinking of the young man who still held an immense place in her heart, even though he was so far away. The bond between them, once marked by secret meetings and furtive glances, now seemed even more complex, as the newfound truth could shake the foundations of everything he believed it to be. This secret from the past not only had the potential to transform their own lives, but also to destabilize the order of a powerful family, to challenge alliances forged in vested interests, and to show that the past is never buried forever. In the silence of the nights, she wondered how it could change their fate, how that ancient shadow could reveal an unexpected light in the midst of so much suffering. With each passing day, the protagonist felt her determination grow, driven by this unique blend of pain, love, and justice. Her mother's letter wasn't just an aged piece of paper. It was a map that guided her along a tortuous but necessary path. In his hands, the past became a precious secret, a secret that needed to be unraveled so that the truth could come to light, so that the mistakes made could be corrected, and so that hope could be reborn from the ashes of abandonment and pain. There, at that moment in her life, she became the protagonist of her own story, determined to face any obstacle to change the course of what seemed impossible. And so, the journey that seemed marked only by separation and suffering began to take on new meaning, revealing that even in the deepest shadows, the light of truth can emerge and transform everything around, opening paths for love, justice, and hope to find space to flourish, even when all seems lost. The path to the truth was long, winding, and full of challenges, but for her, each step taken carried the weight of justice that was finally beginning to take shape. With the evidence in hand, old documents, carefully collected testimony, accounts of former employees who had nothing left to lose, she felt the strength that came from the certainty that she was fighting not just for herself, but for a whole stolen story and for a long-delayed reparation. The decision to confront the past, once only a distant desire, now became a concrete, firm, and determined action. The first step was to look for an experienced lawyer, someone who could transform that pile of evidence into a powerful instrument, capable of challenging the impunity that had prevailed for so long. When he handed the case over to that professional, he felt he was in the right hands. The lawyer, a solid figure with in-depth knowledge of the judicial system, saw in that evidence the chance to open a case that would not only claim the assets illegally taken from her family, but also expose the maneuvers and corruption that sustained his family's fortune. The bureaucracy and natural slowness of the system did not intimidate her. On the contrary, they fed it. He knew that each day of waiting was an opportunity to strengthen his conviction and prepare for the battle that was to come. The feeling that she could finally turn the tables and put everything in its proper place gave her renewed energy, capable of overcoming fatigue, loneliness, and fear. As the process took shape in the courts, the story that was once buried in boxes of forgotten documents began to spread through the streets, the media and social networks. The media, always eager for bombshell revelations, found in that narrative an irresistible plot, a forgotten orphan who fought against a powerful clan, an old injustice that came to light, and a young heir torn between the family's past and the love he felt. Reports, interviews, and rumors began to circulate, and her name, previously unknown, began to occupy headlines and arouse the public's curiosity. What was just a silent struggle, made between walls of files and whispers of witnesses, now became a public spectacle, a real turnaround that defied power and appearances. His family, accustomed to controlling everything and keeping their truths hidden, panicked. The meetings in luxurious offices, the whispered conversations in long corridors, the growing fear of impending exposure, all indicated that this closely guarded secret was about to crumble. They knew that if justice took its course, the consequences would be devastating not only in financial terms, but also in the reputations they had carefully built over the years. The atmosphere inside that mansion was tense, full of distrust and anxiety, because the past they were trying to bury now threatened to emerge with full force, capable of overthrowing everything that seemed unshakable. He, the young man who, until then, had only been a victim of circumstances, was living a whirlwind of emotions. When he learned of the battle she had begun, he felt a deep shock, as if his whole life had been questioned in its most intimate bases. At the same time, a silent and growing admiration was formed within him, because he recognized the courage of that woman who, even after so much pain and abandonment, had found the strength to fight, to get back on her feet and to claim what was rightfully hers. Her image changed before his eyes. From a fragile and forgotten figure, she became a powerful woman, owner of her own history and capable of facing giants. This transformation stirred his convictions, his fears, and made room for confused and intense feelings which he was still trying to understand. As the court case progressed, she felt the responsibility increasing, but also the power of writing her own destiny. Each hearing, each document presented, each testimony heard reinforced her position and wore down the defenses of the family that had previously humiliated her. The struggle was no longer just for material goods, but for dignity, recognition, and justice. The figure of the orphan, previously ignored, now became a symbol of resistance and hope for many who followed her story. The environment, previously gloomy and suffocating, began to clear with the light of truth that imposed itself against silence and fear. The notoriety he gained was an important step for the gears of justice to move, and for the weight of lies to begin to give way to the force of the facts. In the midst of all this, she found in her own transformation a daily motivation, a certainty that every effort, every tear, every moment of doubt was worth it, to prove that no one can erase the truth, no matter how hard they try to hide it behind luxurious walls or empty oaths. The duel between her and his family was no longer just personal. It was a public battle, which showed the power of those who decide to no longer accept what was imposed by fear and oppression. Thus, the woman who had once been discarded and silenced began to occupy an unexpected place, that of the protagonist of her own life, the owner of her story, and the force capable of changing the course of events. It carried not only the hope of justice, but the power of truth, which revealed the flaws, contradictions, and deceptions hidden in the shadows of the past. Her journey showed that, even in the face of the greatest adversity, it is possible to transform pain into strength and abandonment into protagonism. With renewed courage and steady evidence in hand, she moved forward resolutely, ready to face the consequences of that revelation, and to show that, in the end, the truth always finds its way. The reunion between them was not marked by exaggerated dramatism or empty words. It was a meeting charged with silent intensity, a moment in which everything they experienced seemed to converge in a single exchange of glances. He, that young man who had once wielded power and privilege almost as an invisible cloak, now stood before her on an equal footing, unreservedly acknowledging the strength she had gained. That request for forgiveness did not come as a fragile plea, but as a genuine gesture, the fruit of the deep understanding that he had been, until then, part of a system that had separated them and that perpetuated an injustice that he himself was completely unaware of. Her maturity was the definitive mark of that moment. There was no room for immature resentments or cheap revenge, but rather for the recognition that true victory lay in the control of one's own destiny, in the autonomy she had finally won after years of struggle and pain. The transformation she experienced was not limited to herself. It was a force that reverberated beyond the personal, a clear symbol that justice, even if late, can triumph against all barriers and against all power that tries to remain intact through oppression and lies. When it came time to face his parents, the scene was that of a woman who presented herself with the confidence of someone who knows exactly what she wants and why she is there. In a room full of lawyers and journalists eager for every detail, she laid out the accumulated evidence with the precision of someone who had dedicated years to understanding each piece of that puzzle. Documents, recordings, testimonies, all placed on the table like a shield and a sword at the same time, which left no doubt as to the veracity of his story and the weight of the accusations. The awkward silence that took over the room was a reflection of the fall of the powerful. That family, until then respected and feared, saw its carefully constructed facade crumble before the watchful eyes of the press and public opinion. The arrogance that guided them was replaced by nervous looks and frustrated attempts to minimize the facts. But the truth, now more than ever, shone with clarity. The audience followed this turn of events with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction, an old desire for justice that finally found a concrete answer. It was the victory of truth over imposed silence, the confirmation that, even in the most adverse circumstances, it is possible to turn the tables when you have the courage and determination to move forward. She was no longer the forgotten orphan, who suffered on the margins of society, nor the vulnerable young woman who sought a little dignity in underemployment and sleepless nights. He had become a figure of power, not for the money he claimed, but for the integrity with which he conducted his struggle, for the way he transformed his pain into a weapon of transformation. And he, now by her side, was no longer the distant young man, an unwitting accomplice in a dirty story, but someone who was learning to redefine his own convictions, to take his part in the truth, and to support the reconstruction of that love. Not as before, but in a renewed and just way. This turn, however, was not just personal. It also brought a clear and strong message to all who watched that battle. Power is not absolute and can be confronted by those who, even without privileges, have courage and determination. The public exposure of that family showed that no one is above justice, and that lies built to protect vested interests can be undone with the force of truth. The atmosphere was dense, but charged with a collective relief, as if an ancient shadow had finally been dispelled by the light of revelation. In the midst of this turmoil, she maintained a firm and serene posture, knowing that every word spoken, every piece of evidence shown, carried the weight of years of suffering, but also of overcoming. His presence in that moment was the ultimate expression of emotional justice, not revenge based on grudge, but the affirmation of a life that had decided not to bow down to injustice. That formal confrontation, recorded by cameras and witnessed by figures of power, was the crowning of his transformation, the moment when the victim became the protagonist and the truth was reaffirmed with all its strength. While the pieces of that plot fit together before the eyes of the world, the link between her and him began to rebuild, now anchored in the transparency and respect that only the truth can provide. The scars of the past did not disappear, but gained a new meaning, that of marks that reminded us of resistance, courage, and the ability to start over. The dynamic between the two has changed radically, no longer victims of circumstance or pawns in a power game, but partners in a story that, despite adversity, had a real chance of a different future. The audience, who followed every step of that saga, felt the satisfaction of seeing justice being done and witnessing a woman who, in an exemplary way, managed to transform a life marked by losses and humiliations into an example of overcoming and victory. She became not only the owner of her own history, but also an inspiration for everyone who faces similar challenges, showing that it is possible to break the shackles of the past and conquer a legitimate space in the present and in the future. Even with all the noise from the cameras and the public exposure, deep down that victory had a deeply personal flavor. It was the consolidation of a denied right, the rescue of lost dignity, and the reaffirmation that in any struggle the truth is the greatest ally. She stood firm in the face of those who, for years, tried to erase her, showing that time and courage can turn the tide even when all seems lost. This new phase of their lives, although fraught with challenges, brought real hope, a possibility to rewrite the future on their own terms, And it is precisely at this point that history prepares to enter a decisive moment where relationships, feelings and convictions will be put to the test, revealing to what extent the past can be overcome and what paths the truth can open for those who dare to seek it with courage and determination. Their journey is far from over, and the choices they make going forward could redefine not only individual destiny, but the deeper meaning of love, justice, and redemption. The judicial recognition that came as a consequence of the battles faced not only marked a personal victory, but also turned into an opportunity for rebirth and transformation for her. With the part of the inheritance that was finally recognized to her, she did not seek only to satisfy personal needs or old desires. She decided to use this achievement to generate a real and lasting impact on the lives of those who, like her, have already faced deep losses and injustices that seemed irreversible. The creation of the foundation emerged not as a simple formality, but as a sincere and passionate commitment, a mission that reflected its entire history of struggle and overcoming. There, young orphans and victims of abuse would find shelter, support, and above all, a real chance to rebuild their lives, free from the shadows that marked their pasts. This initiative, more than a social action, has become a symbol of hope and resistance, an example of how it is possible to transform pain into strength, suffering into solidarity. The foundation quickly gained prominence, attracting support from various sectors and becoming a beacon for many who sought not only help, but inspiration to move forward. Her story, marked by courage and dignity, began to circulate in speeches, reports, and events, making her name no longer just a reference to a victim, to become synonymous with transformation and leadership. This change did not happen in isolation. She knew that the true victory is not only in the justice recognized by the courts, but in the ability to build something that goes beyond personal barriers and touches the lives of other people. When he decided to invite the boy to participate in that project, he did it from a new perspective. It was no longer an invitation driven by a feeling of dependence or by a youthful romance that could threaten their independence. It was, above all, an invitation for him to join her as a partner in the cause, as someone willing to contribute to the construction of a legacy greater than themselves. This gesture reinforced the maturity that both had achieved, the ability to put purpose above old social roles and the expectations that once defined them. The relationship between them began to be based on mutual respect, on the deep understanding that both were agents of change, capable of inspiring not only each other, but an entire generation that longed for real examples of overcoming. This new phase of the relationship was marked by a delicate and powerful balance, the union of two stories that, even though they were loaded with scars, became a shared strength. They no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. What existed there was a partnership based on values and a life project that overcame the pains of the past. His presence in the project was not only symbolic, but practical, a reflection of the change they both experienced, the ability to act with purpose, empathy, and social responsibility. The maturity of this new bond revealed that the true achievement lay in winning without giving in to resentment or revenge. She had triumphed with class, rising above her own pain and turning what might have been just a chapter of suffering into an inspiring legacy. As the foundation grew and impacted more and more lives, it remained steadfast in its trajectory, aware that public and judicial recognition was only one part of a much larger process. The true transformation happened daily, in contact with those young people who found there not only shelter, but a real chance for change. What moved her was the certainty that each step taken there had a much greater meaning than the immediate reach. Her story was intertwined with that of so many other people who sought justice, dignity, and a different future, and this gave her immense strength to continue facing the challenges that arose. The foundation also became a space where dialogue about rights protection and empowerment gained a voice, bringing together experts, activists, and communities around causes that until then had been little discussed. This environment fostered awareness and social mobilization, generating impact beyond local borders and reaching important political and social spheres. Her transformation, therefore, was not just an individual story, but a movement that began to spread, showing that it is possible to build bridges to a more just and humane future, even from the ruins of the past. With their relationship renewed and strengthened, the social projects gained a new rhythm and a special energy, as if the reunion of the two was not only personal, but also a convergence of dreams and purposes. Collaboration that once seemed unlikely, given the disparity between their positions, now became a powerful alliance, capable of transforming realities and breaking cycles of exclusion and suffering. Each of the Foundation's initiatives reflected the essence of this partnership, the combination of the justice it won with his willingness to be an active part of a true process of change. The journey of reconstruction that she was living, therefore, was not marked by solitary victories or a sense of revenge, but by a genuine commitment to social transformation and to the promotion of values that surpassed any personal interest. This attitude made her an admired figure, not only for what she had achieved, but for the way she led her steps with integrity, empathy, and a clear vision of the impact she could generate in the world around her. As the Foundation prospered, opening doors and offering opportunities to so many young people who were previously on the margins, it was consolidated as a symbol of hope and resistance. His trajectory was a living narrative of how adversity can be transformed into strength and how the courage to face the past can pave the way for a future full of possibilities. Her presence on the social and humanitarian scene was not only the result of a material heritage, but the fruit of a moral and spiritual heritage that she had decided to cultivate and share. Their story, now intertwined by a common mission, continued to unfold with nuances of learning and growth, showing that, despite the pains and challenges, it is possible to rewrite the script of one's own life with determination and dignity. What once seemed like a lonely and impossible battle now presented itself as a shared trajectory, where each step reflected a significant advance towards the realization of bigger and nobler dreams. This movement of overcoming and transformation, marked by conscious choices and a posture of mutual respect, was the true essence of that victory. It was not just the conquest of goods or legal recognition, but the construction of a new identity, where she assumed her role as the protagonist of her own history and as an agent of change in the world around her. The balance between the past and the present, between justice and forgiveness, between love and the social cause, made up the scenario of a life that, despite the difficulties, found its way to flourish. In the rhythm of this new reality, each challenge that arose served as a stimulus to further deepen their commitment to transformation and to reaffirm the importance of not letting themselves be defined by adversity, but rather by their ability to overcome them with class and determination. The relationship that was reborn between them, now marked by partnership and purpose, was living proof that emotional maturity and clarity of purpose can transform even the most complicated bonds into strong and meaningful connections. As the Foundation project advanced, and they walked side by side in search of a fairer future for so many, the feeling that permeated each step was that that journey did not have a predictable end, but a continuous series of possibilities that opened up from the choices made in the present. The story then continued to unfold, rich in meaning and full of potential to surprise and inspire, always keeping alive the flame of transformation that is born of courage and love with purpose. Anyone who has followed this story so far knows the value of each step taken, of each choice made with courage and an open heart. This space is made for those who want to understand that life, even full of challenges, can be transformed when we decide to take control and act with purpose. If this narrative touched something inside you, how about joining this movement? Here the content will always bring insights and inspirations for those who want to go further, turn the tables and build a life full of meaning. If you've made it to this moment, leave a phrase in the comments that shows that this message was for you and something like "I'm with you until the end," so we create an even greater connection, you know? And if during the video you felt that you were living every step of this journey, a like will be like a silent hug, a sign that we are on this journey together. There's also a video right here on the side that tells a similar story, full of twists and turns and overcomings. Click and stay with me there. After all, stories like this show us that the end of a cycle is always the beginning of something new, and sometimes the best part is just ahead.